So thanks very much, Daniel, for it's 12th of March. Yes, for being part of this interview for the thesis, which is called Into the Heart of Systems Change. So I'm really grateful that you'll be able to share your insights, and that way together, we can explore more what it is that we need to realize as well, and what we can uncover in order to recover. Yeah. So what I'd like to start with is, what does collective thrivability mean to you?
Understanding that the story that we've been telling about we must get ahead of as individuals, we must compete, is an outdated story that doesn't actually work on an overpopulated planet with 7.6 billion people on it, and that we got it wrong from the beginning because we created a biological story, an evolutionary story that was strongly influenced by Victorian economics, and justifying a very unequal society already back then in the first industrial revolution. And that really life is all about collaborative advantage rather than competitive advantage. And that the only way that I can work for my enlightened self-interest is by helping the system in which I'm embedded to thrive. So the more we enable other systems to thrive, the biological systems we depend upon, the climate system we depend upon, the more we're actually helping ourselves to do better. And it's also understanding that success is not about maximizing individual parameters of the system for the benefit of a few, but about optimizing the system as a whole, so everybody can live a dignified life and unfold the uniqueness that every single life form brings to this life as a planetary process. There's a deeper dimension, which is a complete shifting from what is it that we want to thrive. Is it us individually, or like we still think of life as divided into lots of species and individuals, but life is one unified process, and we're actually just reflections of that whole looking at itself from within. So thrivability is about reconnecting with that deeper wisdom of our fundamental interbeing, interconnectedness.
Wonderful. Exactly. So for the question 2 then, can you briefly explain how your work supports transformational change for our collective thrivability?
Because really the fundamental shift is a shift of perception, a shift of worldview, a shift of value systems. One of the pervasive false dualisms that we continue to propagate, even in the movement of people that are wanting to work towards positive change, is that people like to classify each other as either practitioners or theoreticians. And when we understand that, as Fritjof Capra so wonderfully puts it, the rivers, if you follow the rivers of the ecological, the social, the economic crisis upstream, you realize that they come from the same source, and it's a crisis of perception, a crisis of consciousness. So there's nothing as theoretical as good practice, and nothing as practical as good theory. If we shift the upstream worldview and value system dimension, if we work at that level of meta design, which is basically culture change, culture design, then everything downstream changes. If as Bill McDonough calls design the first signal of human intention, I like to call it human intentionality expressed through interactions and relationships. It's a very broad definition of design. But if design is that space where theory meets practice, then if the worldview and value system that informs what we design, how we design, and particularly why we design, changes, then everything downstream changes. So I work a lot as an educator. I work also with institutions, both businesses, governments, and civil society organizations, in that fundamental upstream shift of value system and worldview, and but to give it the attraction that people can sign up for it, you also need to work with practical case studies on the ground. So I work with for a long time I worked with eco-villages and transition towns, like at the community scale, where people have a face and can meet together and try to create a pilot a prototype of a more systemically designed system that is viable and is regenerative. In later years, in the last 10 years or so, I've shifted more towards looking at it at the regional level, because I think that at the community level, it's very hard to create a fully resilient and sustainable system, because it's too small. We need to at least work at the regional level. I also talk a lot about scale linking design, that what happens at the local and the regional, the national and the international needs to be somewhat connected. We can't just focus on one of those scales. We actually need to constantly, no matter what scale of those scales we're working on, be aware of what's going on at the other scales and ensure that the salutogenic, the health generating patterns that we try to implement at one scale have synergies and resonate at the other scales, because health is a emergent property of a complex dynamic system that is fundamentally scale linking. My cells need to be healthy for my organs to be healthy, for my body to be healthy, for me to be a healthy contribution to a family, a community, a healthy ecosystem, and a healthy biosphere. And this goes in both directions. You can't have a healthy cell in an unhealthy biosphere either.
Yes.
So
that's very important. And I'm just curious, therefore, also with the work that you're doing, when afterwards, if you're not there, do you find that people are able to sustain that shift that you've helped to support?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think it's we have a certain short-termism in the way we measure success or outcomes, and I deeply trust that sometimes people always hear what is being said. Things always land in people, but that doesn't mean that it will transform or change them immediately. But because it's not about one person facilitating the change, it's about all of us spreading this information in this complex dynamic system that we're part of, and creating relationships that the right information can flow. So sometimes people might drop back into old habits, but some of those people 2 years later might have a shift in their life and a shift in their own understanding, that suddenly some of the things that they've learned come back to them, and they apply them in a new way. So I think we just need to trust that we need to do the work we do, and that everything is an intervention. We will always affect the system by whatever we do and whatever we don't do. It's not quite so linear about whether people do as I told them.
Well, exactly, and this is why I'm curious, because you live this naturally. It's very integrated in you, also through your years of your own study, your personal journey, your work, your commitment. It's really systemic. You are systemic. So it's in your being and beingness. And so what I'm curious, because you also have this awareness from the upstream to the lower stream, so you can see how the two rivers come together, if there are particular conditions from the design perspective, because that's from your regenerative design perspective, you have a lot of awareness there and experience. If there are particular conditions that you embed, such that it doesn't become person dependent on facilitators, but that it truly becomes systemic. So
I think any change process that you try to facilitate needs to be deeply rooted in the biocultural uniqueness of place.
Yeah.
If it comes from the facilitator as a sort of intervener coming in and telling, as the expert again, telling people what they should be doing, it's not going to last. It has to. The most powerful form of facilitation is the facilitation where at the end the people simply believed that they had a wonderful idea and started the first steps towards making it real. And in a way, if they ask themselves, and what did this facilitator do? Do we really need him? And come to the conclusion, no, we don't. We had such a brilliant idea, we'll just do that. Then you've done a really good job as a facilitator. So that's tricky in our current economic system, because you might not get hired back, but ultimately, if the art of planting ideas into people's minds and hearts to the point that they fully own them, to the point that they believe they were theirs, that's how you get behavior and culture change happening. So I try to work with people in place to work on what their vision is, but there's a trickiness there, because if you like, we have such a mass manipulated system with the media and so on. So if and we've seen with the rise of populism that if you manipulate people through the media and then you ask them a simple yes/no question, do you want this guy or do you want this guy, or do you want Brexit or non-Brexit, then people don't necessarily choose in their best interest.
Exactly.
So it's this dance between I present visionary case studies where people somewhere have made a shift to inspire people. But then I remind people that it's not about copying what people have done over there. It's about asking, how can we learn from that? And how would that possibly be relevant to us in this place and in this culture? And so if you can engage people in a co-creating a guiding vision, and not a straight forecast of these are the trends today and this is where we're going to end up in the future, but a blue sky thinking vision of what would be have our cake and eat it scenario, what would be the wonderful, more beautiful world we would like to live in, and really flesh that out, then that can create a sort of lighthouse effect. Again, lighthouses aren't places where you end up. Lighthouses just guide you towards a desirable future, and then you sail past them, and it's never quite the vision that you co-created. It's a different thing that you arrive at, but you needed the lighthouse to guide you and to keep you off the rocks. So it's working much more flexible with systems and trusting that since we don't know, which is another key element of this, fully embracing uncertainty and not knowing, the best we can ever do is to collectively live the questions and inquire, what is the world we would like to co-create, and keep working at that, keep re-asking these questions.
Yeah, that's fundamental. I like that, because that way you engage people's focus and creativity as well, and an innovative capacity towards the solutions and the possibilities and the opportunities, which is where that beautiful growth, ecological growth, lives. Yeah, great. So then, if we then look at, from that perspective, what of the systemic barriers you encountered in your work, personally, as well as organizationally and collectively?
I mean, even picking up from where we were, when you work with multi-stakeholder dialogue, these bigger conversations in place, my experience is that whoever invites you into the conversation is only a part of the system, and they think they're the whole system, or that they're only focused on their story, their national plan for so and so, or their company's plan for this and that, or their community's vision for something else. And normally people have a sort of, well, we don't really talk to these people because they're just blocking it, or there's always somebody missing in the room. And
Yes.
and the key barrier to overcome is to understand that because we're all interconnected, is that the time of them and us thinking of those people are against us and we don't want anything to do with them. That's a deep anachronism that we need to overcome. You need to somehow find ways to bring a representation of the whole system into the room. So you need the three sectors there: business, public authority, and the civil society, and you need to somehow, because again we have these silos.
Yes.
The three silos of the sectors, the silos of academic disciplines, even within our own kind of world workers network. There are people who are deeply convinced that it's all about the social and it's all about process, and we just need to pay more attention to that. And others are more the techie. It's all about technological solutions and finding the right way to build, the right way to move things and transport things, and the right energy systems. And so one of the barriers is, how do we overcome, like how do we value that each one of them are holding a key piece of the puzzle, but how do we create a culture where they can listen to the importance of the other puzzle pieces and begin to have a conversation about how these pieces fit together. And that role, and this is where I'm shifting from kind of systemic difficulties to personal difficulties. That role is often not valued. It's a vital role. This the weaver, the facilitator of these systemic conversations, the builder of these larger visions. But because we value the specialist, unless you call yourself a whole systems design specialist, rather than a generalist who doesn't really know what he's doing but trusts that holding a clear intention will facilitate positive emergence, very few people would hire the latter, and many people would hire the specialist. But the latter might be the more honest way of describing what we're doing. That we don't really know what we're doing, that we have a clear intention of serving life, serving a continued evolutionary pattern, which is based on the fundamental lesson of biomimicry, that life creates conditions conducive to life. But we need to keep asking the questions, keep having the dialogues about what that would actually look like, and be patient. That's another key thing that we've created a system that runs on 4-year economic and election cycles. The most important decisions we need to take as a species cannot be taken because they would be would be unpopular from a political standpoint and would get the party that pushes them voted out of office, and so nobody takes these decisions. And then if one party dares to take them, it swings over to the other party and they undo these decisions. So I think we need to find new types of political institutions that are like wisdom councils or councils of elders that hold these seventh generation type decisions above the political process, and each political party would need to as their core stand in an election campaign would have to reiterate, yes, we are signed up to these long-term goals that we co-created with the other, because these are the things we know we need to keep working at, no matter what political color we have. So overcoming barriers, overcoming silos, overcoming short-termism, shifting what we value in a way that these key goals of weaving and interconnecting are valued to the point that people can feed their family doing that work, and rather than
exactly. So this is very important to point, and it comes also out of the research which you mentioned, also people's perception of time. And in the research from the thesis, what came up is in the organizations of tasks, that mechanical way of time, looking at time and outcomes, becomes almost structurally embedded in a very damaging way. So the two case studies are the schools, how children learn, And in these case studies, Cambridge school certificates become dominant. So the learning goals and learning tasks are all organized in terms of, the learning outputs to sit for the exams and to get the marks. And so it's got nothing to do with discovery, experiential-based learning and dialogue replace all of that. Becomes suppressed through these other goals. And then the other case study is a large organization where even when I train people in creativity and innovation, they're saying that the tasks that they're given do not require them to think outside the box. It's from A to B. You just have to, in a very not process as we are thinking, but by the procedures that they've organized, that doesn't allow you at all to think ahead. Yeah. So what you can see in both these systems, the way the tasks are organized and set, bring up the very barriers that you're mentioning here. And then the second barrier, which was the first one that you mentioned, namely that pattern for human beings, us versus them. And to start to, instead of building to a culture and a dialogue and a conversation of we and us, you see that in these two particular systems I just mentioned, the us versus them is the us versus them division between decision rights, those who decide, those who have power. So our decision rights are distributed in the systems, and those who feel they don't have. So the ones that just have to do as they were told, students in this case, or employees. And then those who say they hold power would then hear the complaints, but then say we can't do any otherwise, because if we do organize the tasks and time allocation and decision rights differently, we don't get the outcomes that we need to have. So there's this kind of entrapment, yes? So do you have any, in your experience in working to transform and overcome these barriers, have you seen from your design perspective a different way in which both like learning tasks or tasks in companies and the way people have to carry out that work could be designed differently, such that by the activity and what we are doing, it naturally starts to bring up the kind of consciousness shift that we want to see?
Well, just briefly, because you mentioned schools and research, the way, like, more and more now, when you apply for funding for any kind of research or educational activity, or if you write curriculum, people push you into this, what clearly is defining the learning outcomes. Or in terms of research, you're very often asked, like you're applying for a 6-year research grant, and which starts a year or a year and a half from when you're writing the application, so 7.5 years in the future. And one of the things you're asked to stipulate is what will be the outcomes of your research. Well, you wouldn't be embarking on 6 years of investigation and questioning if you knew what the outcomes were already.
That's exactly it, yes.
So it's almost got a little bit perverse the way that we're structuring our research funding, and in a similar way, where's the room for creativity and co-learning and valuing that? No matter who your learner is, whether it's children in primary school or secondary school or young adults in university, if you know what you want to come out of them so clearly, you're actually in that very act disempowering them and saying what they have to contribute to this process values nothing. I already know what they need to know at the end of this process. So it's the clear old pattern of I'm the teacher, I know what's best, and they're the students, and they just need to know what I want them to know. And I think that's completely mistaken. We actually create rote, like monkeys that learn by rote rather than creative innovators. If we create systems like that. So I've just recently read that Finland is moving towards being the first country in the world where they abandon all school subjects, and they start working with children on the individual basis of what is it that you're passionate about. And they might say trees, but a good teacher will be able to teach something about sociology, something about biology, something about mathematics, in letting a child explore what trees are all about. And I think that's what we need to come back to, because then we can really learn. Like the indigenous wisdom traditions honor that the children are the holders of the stories that will create the future that we're living into. And how can we live healthily into those futures if for so long don't listen to what the children have to tell us?
Exactly. And then how do we facilitate it when these children apply for jobs and they are these free thinkers and innovators, and now suddenly they have to be told because they're told by management, you just have to do as I say, and I don't want you to think about whether it makes sense. You just have to fill in the forms like that. They feel very discouraged. Islamic perspective, if we are changing our educational systems in line with what you're just sharing, yes? What we need to do at the same time when we're looking at the world of business, for example, where I find most of the constraints in a lot of the organizational cultures, you can't hear well?
It's done that again. Yeah, okay, that's quiet again. It seems like when you move
that the microphone moves.
Yeah, okay, no. Okay. That's fine again.
Yes. So, another barrier, yeah? So when you have these children that are coming out of the kind of educational systems that you're talking in the right design, yes? So they really, they've been able and supported to learn as by their interest and their passion. When these children now apply for a job, so they go to the next kind of level in the system, you find often that they feel completely lost because their ways of thinking is so totally different from still how business in particular is organized.
So, I remember doing a master's in holistic science at Schumacher College, and after I learned so much that year. It's really transformed how I think about the world and how I do what I do. But I was in a deep crisis afterwards because I just really didn't know how to make an expensive master's program that I'd invested an enormous amount of energy and time into a way to make a living. It took me another 3 years of creativity to actually find my own path to apply what I've learned, because there weren't ready-made jobs for people like me.
That's it, exactly. This is the question I get asked a lot, and so that means that we also, for all of us who are supporting that transformation on one level in the system, we need to be really conscious and aware where there's still the barriers at the other levels of the system, so that the beautiful positive growth that's being generated through these changes is not being trampled upon and squashed at the other end. And I've seen this in that sometimes in the work of people who are facilitating for these changes, that there is not the through lines. The ones who are in education are not working in business. The ones who are working in business don't work in education, and the ones who are working in governance hardly touch base with both. So it comes back to all the people in the room. All the people in the system need to be somehow given a place in the room. And so what would be your message, so to say, to the business that's still run in that old mechanistic patriarchal culture, and who still believes that the financial bottom line is the most important outcome, and that people need to just be productive, and to be productive they need to work long hours and have a lot of pressure? How could we get them into this conversation?
My sense is that ground is shifting, and that, I mean, one of the metaphors I use a lot with government and with business is it's a metaphor that comes from friends in the International Futures Forum, that were really challenged to redesign the plane we're on while flying it. And these businesses that you just mentioned are really faced with, in evolutionary metaphors, they're dinosaurs that only have the choice to convert themselves into small little mammals or go extinct. And how do you, like, one of the lessons when you start to apply systemic biomimicry to the design of regenerative enterprises and regenerative businesses, you have to open up the box that culturally we find very difficult to open up, which is that death and mortality is part of vibrancy and life, and that it's not a bad thing to consciously design for the death of your own company. Because if you do so wisely, you can make your own company become the fertilizer of the new ecosystem that wants to emerge. And I think in terms of the buzzwords that are starting to be used, decentralized manufacturing and so on, and knowledge culture, peer-to-peer, all that, open source sharing, there's something that wants to be born, which is the value of some of these bigger companies that might even be in a good space. Like I work with a company that has 35, 40 years of experience in making ecological detergents and cleaning products. How can a company that operates in 40 or 50 countries around the planet transform itself into a knowledge holder that works with bioregional partners to create bioregional production for bioregional consumption, with local partners creating local jobs and a thriving local economy, but being the facilitator of knowledge exchange and innovation, because sometimes at that smaller scale there isn't, in economic terms, the surplus to do a lot of research and development. So if we can create collaborative networks that again scale link the local, regional and global, and a bit like in the Toyota system, create these regenerative enterprise ecologies that share research and development and innovation, share existing knowledge, and clearly have an idea of what success would look like even if it doesn't go on forever. Like that how do we, just as we see in the way that we collaborate in spirodynamics terms, when this flex flow of collaboration where people don't have these big consultancy, well, they still exist because they're slow to go, but the really cutting edge consultancies are coming together on a job with the right people for that job, and then they dissolve again, and then they form somewhere else on another job, rather than having a big staff of lots of people that always have to be there. And in a similar way, I think companies will be more dynamic and flowing. And again, if we shift towards collaborative advantage and valuing diverse contributions, then the fear of, but what if my little bit dies, then I won't have a role anymore? No, because the experience and the skills can be composted and fertilized and bring up useful contributions somewhere else. So, yeah, it's a long way of winded answer of saying that I think we need to facilitate conversations with these big companies that are still running in these old patterns, that are conversations that honor the historic contributions, that don't belittle or beautify the amount of responsibility and of the impacts that these companies have had, and some of them might be positive, but a lot of them are also negative impacts, and they need to be named. But they need to be named without shaming or blaming. They need to really say, we didn't know better, and you tried your best, but it's no good anymore.
Yes.
And we need to start having these difficult conversations about how do we really, like right now I'm noticing that everybody seems to call for disruptive innovation. But to disrupt just for the sake of disruption isn't serving us.
Exactly.
We need to keep the lights on people in jobs, children in schools, and that means we need transformative innovation, because all the disruption is going to do is to create yet more ability for populists to do the divide and conquer and manipulate people into following really their own very small power elite personal agendas rather than a truly humanitarian vision of nobody left behind, creating a world that works for all. So yeah.
And then you make a very important point there, which is precisely the reason we never call our work disruptive innovation, because it's based on a belief system of human beings that change, if you can only see change if it's really big, and something falls apart, and whereas there's another way to facilitate change on a much more subtle level that can also be very gentle. It's like this beautiful, gentle, guiding light, and we may not notice it in the beginning. But its power is, in fact, that it is so subtle, but it is so incredibly effective. Yeah? And so maybe another barrier is also there for people's perception or conditioning around how change needs to take place and how transformation looks like. And understanding that we don't always have to create pain first.
Yeah, and also I think there's still this idea of current system doesn't work anymore. We just need a bit of innovation, and then we need a bit of prototyping, and then we build a new system. And then once we're there, we can down tools and live happily ever after, or then we'll have a break for 100 years and run on that system. And it's precisely that we've created a world that is now stretched with the amount of people that are on this planet, and it is stretched with the amount of damage we've done to the biosphere and the erosion of our social cohesion and social systems, and we're likely to be in this change and transformation game forever.
That's it.
It is not a little phase that we have to get through and then everything will just be in calmer waters again. And that means we need to build the capacity to live with transformation as a constant giving.
Yes.
Like one of my mentors, Professor Brian Goodwin, one of the co-founders of the Santa Fe Institute for Complexity and the whole field of complexity theory, he said to me once that the secret of living a fulfilling life is to be ready in every moment to give up who you are for what you could become. And I think that holds for humanity too. And then I'm not saying that in a sort of transhumanist sense of we're going somewhere else into sort of robotic beings. We need to hold the wisdom of the past with this, but we need to be able to take ourselves less serious. And the way to do that is to redefine what self is. That the self isn't this skin encapsulated ego that we're culturally conditioned to believe that's what we should identify with as who we are, and begin to identify as life as a planetary process. And in that is there's a humility and an audacity in it. There's a humility of not knowing where we're going, and that we can all only do our best, and that therefore really intentions matter more than anything. And at the same time, there's this audacity of understanding that we can speak with the authority of 3.8 billion years of evolution, that we are life expressing itself through our individual standpoints, and that everything we do matters, that nobody is too small to make a difference. Everybody does make a difference.
Exactly. And it's interesting because you've actually just answered the next question, which was how were you able to transform or transcend these barriers? You've touched on a lot of that, yeah? Is there anything in addition that you would like to share in response to that question? The how you were able.
It's this. Luckily, this framing is definitely gaining cultural popularity now. That we need a new story.
Yes.
It's and the importance of the new story, or the new and ancient story, is as much as having a conversation about what are these new stories that can guide us. It is becoming clear of what is our current story. Yeah. Because the problem with our current story being so degenerative and destructive is that we don't even understand. We just take so much of that story as given, as the reality that we have to deal with. Yeah. But we don't understand that so much of that reality is actually created by us, that we bring forth the world we live in based on the stories we tell of who we are, where are we going, what are we here for, what is success, what should we really value. And by having conversations about this old story doesn't serve anymore, what's the new story, we can learn a lot about the mistakes we're making from looking at what our current story is. So shifting towards that I mentioned before, the framing that is originally Thich Nhat Hanh's word interbeing, and then Charles Eisenstein kind of popularized this idea of the shift from the story of separation to the story of interbeing. For me, that is one of the changes we need to make, and of course. The story of separation runs through everything. It runs through mind-body, that we try to think our way into the future rather than be our way into the future, because we're so disconnected from our embodied beingness as flesh and bones, and the way that even our whole bodies have been shaped in conviviality with all the other beings in the family of life, and that we need biodiversity because we're biologically dependent on the rest of this community of life to give our life meaning and purpose and gravitas and direction, and so shifting those conditions means understanding that nurturing the soils, replanting the forests, healing the waterways, cleaning up the oceans are just fundamental basic jobs we need to do if we want to create a planet where life creates conditions conducive to life. If we want to fall in sync with the evolutionary story of diversification and subsequent reintegration of diversity at higher levels of complexity through collaboration and cooperation. That's how life has turned a rock hurling through space into the beautiful blue-green planet that has brought us forth and nurtures life. So yeah.
Yes, and again, you've answered the question ahead. So I was going to ask you what would be the most important factors and conditions. Yeah. So you mentioned some already that need to be present for humanity to avoid irreversible collapse of our life support systems and the breakdown of our social, cultural, and ecological fabrics.
Yeah, I guess I did jump ahead.
That's good. I like that. That means that the narrative here, it comes through naturally. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess going back to the previous question just briefly, that I'm beginning to realize more and more if we fully embrace not knowing and uncertainty, then the most powerful anchor that we can use in our work to keep in integrity, in connection to that larger whole we are, is really what is our intention. and to keep coming back to how can I serve, and to understand, because everything is connected and that in order to serve, you need to serve yourself, and you need to serve your community, and you need to serve life as a planetary process. And so if all our interventions, all our beingness is rooted in trying to the best of our abilities, stay with that intention of serving on those three levels of self, community, and world, which is a very ancient wisdom. It's not something new. Then I think we're beginning to become the kind of interveners that affect the system that they're working with through the quality of their being, through holding this deeper how can I serve intention at the center of everything, and trusting that's actually where positive emergence ripples from.
Yes, and what I found in the case study there was that the people, both participants in the school, so now these are the teachers and students, yes, as well as the people in the businesses I've worked with and were part of the case studies, would individually completely embrace what you're saying, and love that and endorse that, and then they every time share the same feedback. But when I go to school, I can't live that reality, or when I'm at work, I am asked to deny so much of my humanity, and my boss is not interested in that vision. I just need to perform, get the task done, almost be like a machine. It's very sad. So, and people spend so much time in those systems. So for us, then also the challenge for these systems, which are also part of the larger systems, in what way? Because to tell them that they need to accept that death, they may resist that message. What bridge can we provide so that the lived experience in learning and in work shifts in the direction that you just mentioned?
Well, I think because we're really challenged to rethink education from the ground up.
Exactly.
And that doesn't just mean, on the one hand, it means we need to pay careful attention of how we enable and empower the current generations that are coming in, the young children, and to more creatively deal with the mess that we and our ancestors have created. But also this kind of 1/3 of life education, 1/3 of life active work, 1/3 of life retirement is a completely outdated model. Yes. And it's a model that really only existed for a blip in history.
Yes.
And most of us now in their 40s working understand that the last third is a false promise. We're probably not going to have that third of retirement or living of proceeds that don't exist anymore. And it also means that any company that believes that not investing in education at all levels of the company, that enable their managers and their line managers and their workers all the way down to the lowest paid workers, the security staff and the cleaning personnel and so on, to keep learning, to keep exploring how they contribute. And I think that in that is more possible to sell companies a organizational learning process. And if that process starts with values, starts with the notion that the way that you get truly unique companies that do unique things in the world isn't just by how do we do what we do, but it is by collectively inquiring why do we do what we do, and that really every human being. I use this a lot to justify my own somewhat at points. Yeah, like I very often work for not so much money, and so I've come into the habit of saying I earn in two economies. I earn in the economy of money, and I earn in the economy of meaning. And for me, every job needs to pay in both currencies.
Beautiful.
And mainly I tend to choose, as long as I can afford it and feed my family with it, I choose the economy of meaning over the economy of money. And I think this holds for everybody.
Yes.
And the way you get engaged company cultures is if everybody in the organization feels that when they come home at the end of the day, they haven't just sold 8 hours of their lifetime, of their spirit, of their breath, only to make some more money to somebody else and get a little bit of money in return, but that they've actually done something that had a wider meaning for themselves, for their community, and for the wider system that they're part of. And so opening up conversations in companies about what is your purpose truly, what are the core values of your company, why do you exist, can open up conversations that then lead into a collective learning process, and that's where you can then feed in the deeper wisdoms of designing for a company's own death, or designing for regenerative patterns, and designing for constant transformation rather than rigid structures.
Yes, and that is also, you mentioned something very important in terms of embracing uncertainty as an ongoing learning process. Yes, and if you're looking at this mechanistic worldview, was born from the exact opposite intention, namely to seek more control, create more predictability, and have less uncertainty. And it was seen that by doing so, we were, as human beings, set aside or set apart from the rest of our species. So it's interesting also how you're sharing that now in some ways, where we've seen the most destructive outcomes of that pattern of thought, we need to now embrace uncertainty in order to actually make it through to the next stage.
Yes, and I think this is really important. This is, again, one of the core lessons I learned from Brian Goodwin, is that like he taught me on the Masters in Holistic Science, and the way he was framing the shift, that the conceptual or underlying shift of what holistic science was trying to do is to move out of this paradigm that science can wrestle more predictability and more controllability from nature, through this process that is a separating process of basically dividing things into disciplines, taking a reductionist approach that tries to explain the complexity of life by understanding individuals or even organs in individuals, and breaking it down to smaller and smaller units that are artificially created, because you set boundaries around the system. We're only studying this cell in vitro in this type of lab conditions. And then, of course, you get all sorts of predictability coming out of the system. But then we believe that predictability has anything to do about the larger system, and that's actually not the case. And so the core lesson of complexity theory is that we're moving from a world that is where science is focused on prediction and control to science at the very best being able to guide appropriate participation in this system, and that as part of that you need to embrace not knowing, you need to embrace the fundamental uncertainty and uncontrollability, and what I've noticed is that there are still a lot of people, also people who really care and want to make a positive impact, that find it really hard to truly take that lesson of complexity to heart. that there's still, like, even in the complexity sciences now, with the merging with all the kind of big data and stronger and stronger computer power and more complex algorithms, the field of complexity now is going back and saying, like, if we just throw bigger computers and more big data at the system, then we can wrestle some more predictability and controllability from this complexity. And I think that's just falling back into the old pattern. Like, to truly embrace not knowing and understand that we will always be surprised by side effects that we couldn't predict, and that even the most sustainable solutions we can dream of today, the most thriving systems that we can create a whole system design for, once they're implemented and they're running, we will see that there are side effects to what we've created, and we will have to be able to adapt and respond to it and keep learning and keep transforming. It's a pattern that I don't think we'll break free from, that yesterday's solutions become today's problems. Even the best solutions we can come up today with will be part of tomorrow's problems, and because the world keeps shifting. And so that's creating company cultures and education systems that hold that at the heart. And of course that disempowers the expert, because the expert lives of the fact that they know what they're doing. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. And also the populist political leader pretends they know what they're doing. And people, because uncertainty is uncomfortable, people will fall for the guy who, even if they kind of know that it's a false promise, who says, trust me, I know what I'm doing, let's do it this way. Then the guy who says, actually, anybody who tells you that they know what they're doing in this complex world is basically telling you a lie. And therefore, I'm standing up to tell you, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know roughly where we need to head. I can offer you a lighthouse, but I can't offer you a solution. And this lighthouse has to be shared. So what do you think? It's a different type of leadership. And we're, well, I can say with confidence that we're moving towards that future, because I know with confidence that if we don't get there, we won't have a future.
Yes, that's right. It's very, very true. Yes. Beautiful. So again, you've moved already into the next question. So what does going into the heart of systems change mean to you?
Going inside. There is no such thing as systems change without personal transformation and personal development. And as much as I had points in my life where I got really frustrated with all the Safu sitting, cushion sitters and belly gazers that were just sort of disappearing into their Vipassana courses to spend days in, days out meditating and convinced that that's what was going to change the world. It's both and. Yes, it does. It all starts within, and it is like we need to have that dance of being socially and ecologically engaged activists and engage with the world, and not just sit in a cave and meditate. But ultimately, all of this has to be deeply rooted in a personal development and an openness to keep learning yourself and modeling that dance with uncertainty and that continuous transformative innovation in your own being. Being ready to give up who you are for what you could become is something that happens on all levels. It starts with the individual, and it then can transform the family, the community, the bioregion, and the planet. So going to the heart of the systems change, even the question has it in it, it's going to the heart. It's understanding that the mind is a wonderful tool, that we can apply. But if it becomes abstract and cold and entirely guided by rationality, in entirely measured by key performance indicators and measurable outcomes, as we so like to do, then we design out of our spectrum of possibilities everything that is based on qualities, everything that is based on feeling and intuition. And I think most people know that they can look at the figures, they can do the strategy game with their lives, but the really important decisions, even if everything in terms of measured indicators and numbers says one thing, how come then people sit with that decision and it just doesn't feel right?
Yes.
And ultimately they make a different decision that is entirely irrational.
Yes.
Because something else told them, you're making a big mistake here. Trust me. And that something else is a heart wisdom that isn't heart as opposed to head, but is really coming from the synthesis of mind, body, and spirit in a sense of trusting that we can listen to the wisdom within, we can listen to the wisdom of the wider system of nature. Nature can be a deep teacher, and we do need to also listen to the wisdom of the community. It's again that three, how do I serve myself, the community, and the planet. It's going to the heart of systems change is heartful listening to all three levels of our being.
Yes, very well said. I love that. And it touches, because that word came up also for me while listening to you in the previous conversation, trust. Yeah, because all these old mechanistic ways of thinking also came because we didn't really go into trust. We didn't put the growth and the development in the trust in that inner being, inter-being. We put our trust in procedures, mechanisms, because we didn't trust in the wisdom of life. So as I'm listening to you, I feel that brings us so back also into the heart of trust. And in trust means that we can embrace uncertainty. I don't have to know it.
There's something about this species level rite of passage that we're undergoing at the moment that requires us to take a step not knowing whether we're going to hit firm ground or the abyss.
Yes.
But we need to make that step. In wisdom traditions, it's often called a leap of faith.
Yes.
And we can't make this transformation deep enough if we don't actually sit in the uncomfortableness of not knowing whether we're going to make it.
Yes.
And set our intentions from a place where we act with integrity even if we aren't going to make it, in the conviction that how we're going to go out matters.
Yes.
And it's, if we understand, like there are scientific theories like the Santiago theory of cognition that say that we bring forth a world by the way we interact with each other. And we need that trust that were we to interact with each other differently, were we to change our fundamental guiding narrative, that we would bring forth a different world.
Yes.
And that means letting go of the old story and living and being the new story. And there is no guarantee. As a matter of fact, the old story tells you, no, you don't want to do this. You might die. And the new story says, you're alive, you can't die. Life is a planetary process. You're already like the gift of the present moment of being able to live and interact with this larger being that we are. That's what matters. And so it's, trust is key in all this. That if we don't trust that we can co-create a thriving future for all, if we just sort of have it as a fancy intellectual exercise that, that would be nice, or we could meet in 15 more conferences where we all self-congratulate each other about already getting the new story, and kind of, as you mentioned in the beginning, live off the old story as the ones who meet and talk about the new story. There's a danger in that. We've certainly been in plenty of meetings where that felt a bit like that, where it felt like we should tug on our own masks and look at who are we, that we're the privileged, white, overeducated people that that can afford to meet at these gatherings and self-congratulate that they're evolutionary leaders. Well, I think it takes a bit more than that. We need to really deeply trust that we are co-creating that world by the way we interact and by the way we contribute.
Exactly, and that is then also as the final question, your key message to humanity now and the future generations.
It's a tricky one. Because we don't know, and so I think it is very much what we just talked about. It's as much as it sounds like a platitude from a John Lennon song, or straight from the Bible. Love is at the heart of it. Because love is that bridge into being. It's where false boundaries dissolve, and we connect with gratitude for life in all its expressions. And so, because we don't know where we're going, a message to future generations or to humanity is to believe in life, and the interbeingness, the connection between all of life is love. It is the Maturana again, the biology of love. In this bringing forth a world together, we are deeply attracted to all things living, and we contribute to all things living by the way we are. And so moving forward with a love for life, with biophilia that is innate in us, and with the intention of creating conditions conducive to life, and with the openness to keep living the questions together, to keep asking, are we still on track? Are we serving self, community, and planet? I'm kind of reminded, like, it depends. Some days I'm more hopeful than others, and lately there's a lot of news that are pretty dark, and so I'm frequently reminded of this wonderful Rilke poem that Joanna Macy translated from the Book of Hours, which goes, "Dear darkening ground, you have endured so patiently the walls we've built. Maybe you'll give the cities one more hour, cloisters and churches too. And those who labor, maybe you let their work grip them for another 5 hours or 7, until that inexplicable moment when you become forest again and water and widening wilderness. Give me just a little more time. Give me just a little more time until I can love the things. No, so I can love the things until they're real and ripe and worthy of you." And there's a beauty in that of what is he asking time for? It's not saying, I don't want to die or I don't want this to end. It's really acknowledging that the gift of the present moment, the gift of the breath of life that we all have been given and share, otherwise we couldn't be talking to each other right now, is to love, is to be in deep gratitude for this larger process that we're part of.
Yes.
And if more of us do that, then we might bring forth a different world. And if we don't, and the fate of, speaking as a biologist, 99.9% of all species that have ever lived on the planet extinct. So most likely our species is going to go extinct sooner or later. And at some point our planet, our solar system will, like our sun, will burn out in a supernova. But that's a long way into the future. And what really matters is, what do we do right now? What are we bringing forth right now? And to live life from love, with an intention of service, with a knowing that if you only ask, both your inner wisdom and the wisdom of nature can give you guiding answers of how to live a meaningful life. That's really all I can advise. I don't have solutions that are silver bullet type solutions.
Yes, that's very beautiful. And for the children that are not yet born, that are still in the field of potential, you are their ancestor. Would you like them to know?
Yeah. Sometimes I look at my 7-month-old daughter and I want to apologize. We did the best we could. Yeah.
I know. I feel that too.
Might not be enough, but
we did the best.
Yeah.
Yes. And may they somehow receive that, to bring forth from within them what is for them to bring forth from within them.
Yes. And
because within them we will be.
Yes, I think it's one of those overquoted Einstein stories of whether he is an optimist or a pessimist, and he said, "I'm a pessimist for the 21st century and an optimist for the 22nd." and so maybe also these future generations that are yet unborn, maybe they're given the gift to create a more thriving and abundant and better planet than the one that they received from the past. We ran the system down to the point that we're now facing the effects of a number of generations of having created a degenerative system. And if we do our job right and we manage to at least get the point of inflection where the tide turns, that doesn't mean that future generations aren't going to live over many generations with the effects of our disastrous actions. But maybe it also means, because so much has been destroyed, there's so much to regenerate and rejoice in. And it's the kind of work that is very deeply gratifying. So if my daughter starts planting forests when she's 14, she might live when she's 80 to see rich and abundant forests where there were degraded grasslands and deserts.
Yes.
And hold that knowledge that she was part of that transformation. And so maybe that's our gift to those generations, that we messed up so deeply that we've given them a massive opportunity to do things better than we did.
And that we love them enough that we're willing to go through all the discomfort for it, and all the uncertainty and all the pain that goes with this. this change in us, but that we do it because we love them enough.
Yep, it's that simple, that 4-letter word. Love.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.